Now for all of these different kinds of section cuts, they become most useful when you generate 2D drawings of the section or of the model. And so we'll take this time to go over the Make2D command. Make2D takes any of your viewports and generates 2D line work, pure 2D line work of that view. This is particularly useful when you take 2D viewports of a 3D perspective or axonometric view, but it can be useful for any of the viewports. So as an example, we'll create a 2D view of this perspective, and then we'll create a couple of 2D views of sections being cut through it. So you simply type the Make2D command. This will bring up a dialog box. You'll confirm the view that you want to be taking the 2D drawing from. In most cases, you'll just choose the current view. You can also choose all 4 views at the same time, but generally you'll choose the current view. And then there's a number of options you can choose that have to do with converting that 2D drawing into layers. Generally, I recommend having the Maintain Source Layers box checked. So if you have a complex model that has many layers, in the 2D view, it will maintain those layers and will give you a little bit more control to, say, edit line weight or adjust the hierarchy of those lines. Sometimes you might want to show the viewport rectangle. That can be sometimes useful when you're matching a view to a perspective to kind of create that frame, but that isn't always necessary. Showing hidden lines sometimes can be helpful if you want to try to really communicate a complex 3D object, and you can kind of apply a lighter or dashed line weight to hidden lines that are being blocked by a solid surface. And then even occasionally tangent lines can be useful as well. When you have a kind of rounded edge, like this model has, for example, the tangent lines will help articulate those rounded edges, even if there isn't a hard vertice. And by default, RHINO will create separate layers for all these different parts, and you can change their names and hierarchies. And so too, if you have a clipping plane, it will also create a separate layer for that. So I'll say OK. And by default, the Make2D drawing is going to be centered on the origin of your grid. So it's a good idea to move your model to the side if you don't, so that you have kind of space for the Make2D line work to appear. And it's going to generate a whole new hierarchy of layers that are only the Make2D lines. So it's going to be under the kind of heading of Make2D, and then it will be divided into different hierarchies like hidden and visible lines. And even below that, there'll be different hierarchies that show you tangents and other kinds of things that you set up. Sometimes it can be a good idea in RHINO to even add additional layers that can help you if you know exactly how you're going to be using this drawing. Sometimes it can be helpful to set up even additional layers that you can change your Make2D lines to help you create a drawing in Illustrator. For a point of comparison, I'm also going to make a clipping plane of my model, and I'm going to use that to generate some additional Make2D and line work. So because I know that whenever I make 2D, the computer is going to generate that line work by default at the origin, I'm just going to move the existing Make2D drawing to the side, and then I'm going to create a clipping plane in my perspective view. It's not exactly where I wanted it, but I always know I can use my gumball to adjust the clipping plane. That looks pretty good. I'm going to select the model and I'm going to make 2D again. Everything looks good. I see that there's going to be a separate layer for the clipping plane itself. I'm going to click OK. We can see now that we have another view of the model, but a section is cut of it. I want to make sure that the clipping plane lines are on a separate layer, so I'm going to change the color of the clipping plane layers to make sure that what I think is the section cut is visible. So I'm going to make that red. Sometimes you have to be careful to make sure that you get to the kind of bottommost layer. Make2D by default is going to set up hierarchies of layers, and it's only kind of the bottommost layer in any one category. In this case, I'm interested in the clipping plane that actually contains the lines. So I just changed the color of the wrong layer. Now you can see that the clipping plane lines are showing up as red, They're that bottommost layer under the clipping plane category, and I know that I have a separate layer for that kind of line. So at this time, I'm going to export my drawing to Illustrator. So I'm going to select the Make2D lines that I'm interested in and exporting, and I'm going to go to File, Export Selected. That way it will only select the lines that I've selected as opposed to everything in the model file. I'm going to choose Adobe Illustrator, which has already been selected, but you want to verify that Adobe Illustrator is selected and click Export. It's going to bring up a dialog box. It's going to ask you about the scale of the drawing that you're exporting. You can either have the scale kind of match the viewport, or you can have it preserve the model scale. In this case, I'm going to have it preserve the model scale at 1 inch to 1 inch, a 1:1 scale, so that the kind of scale of the drawing will actually match the scale of the paper. 1 inch in the model will be 1 inch in the paper space. And I'm going to click Export. You can then open the file in Illustrator, and you'll see that, like, based on the default piece of paper, the model is kind of large. You can make sure that first of all, that the paper in Illustrator is the size you want. I'm going to actually change it to a sheet of arches, so it'll be a little bit bigger, and then I can select my model, and depending on the kind of drawing you're making, you may want to be a bit more careful about scale than I'm being right now, but this is just as an example to see how the line can appear on paper. And then I can use the layers that transferred over from RHINO to actually adjust the line weights of this drawing. So I am going to make all the hidden lines a kind of light. You can't even see them right now because they're colored white, but I'm going to make them a very light line weight. I'm going to go 0.1, and I'm also going to give it a dash. I'm going to give it a small dash, and maybe not quite that small. And then in turn, I am going to make all of the lines that appear black right now. So I always kind of lock the layers I'm not interested in to select the layers that I am interested in. I'm going to make these a slightly darker line weight. I'm going to say 0.5. And then for the clipping plane, which is colored red from RHINO, I'm going to make those lines a really dark 2 point, so you can really see the section cut. So this gives you just a brief sense of how you can take line work from a Make2D drawing in RHINO and bring it into Illustrator for post-processing.